Welcome to this webinar about client onboarding and the future role of eIDAS, presented by John Erik Setsaas, Identity Architect at Signicat. Please use the chat function if you have any questions. We will go through them at the end of the webinar session. And I will now let my colleague John Erik continue.
Thank you for the introduction, Dorte. Like mentioned, I will talk about client onboarding, and we will look at the eIDAS and see what role the eIDAS can have in this process. So let's look at identity assurance. We're talking about identities, and if we look at a traditional identity assurance, this is typically a physical meeting. You need to bring some ID papers, you meet with a person, and the papers are verified, and you get an account. This is the typical, and this is for regulated business. The regulated business are under directives, regulations to know who they're dealing with. This is for two reasons. It's for the anti-money laundering, and it's for to prevent terrorist financing. So therefore, anybody doing banking will have to do some assurance of people. We call this the KYC, Know Your Customer process. And I mean, we've all been through this process. These people my age been through this. You go into a bank, you show papers. Of course, the challenge is that today the user expectation is to do everything digital. That's what you do with most services. You can use any kind of device. You can be anywhere, you don't have to show up, there's no human interaction, you do all your digital stuff, and then you're a customer. And that's what we're used to with most services. However, the regulated businesses are still not there. Because what a user typically needs is a wall to climb. It is difficult to become a financial customer. You sign up as a user, you don't really have this understanding of why you need to provide this all information. I have to upload my passport. Why is it so easy to get an account other places, but not on banks and financial institutions? We did a research about last year on this, interviewing people on signing up to financial services. And the results were actually quite stunning. It showed that 40% have it abandoned at some time because it's too complex, too much time, they didn't have the information. And this is quite a big number, and of course lost business. If you want to have a look at this report, it can be downloaded from the Signicat website, so please go there and you'll find a download button so you can read and look at it. But this really tells us that there is a need for a better way of onboarding customers. You need a simpler way. Of course, this is a challenging process. You need to have a reasonable degree of assurance that this person is who he claims to be. And you have the requirements from the regulators, the KYC process. And these are strict, and in some cases they are making them even stricter. And again, this is for the good of society. We want to prevent money laundering. We want to prevent terrorist financing. Onboarding is costly, especially if you have the manual steps. Remember the cost of having a person meeting a new customer, looking at documents. This is a cost. It's also a cost for the customer having to travel someplace to a building. And of course, new types of banks now, they don't even have buildings. So it is a costly, it's time consuming to do this process. Another challenge is the maturity of the population. Are people used to using the digital means? Well, more and more obviously. I mean, the kids growing up today have devices from they're pretty small, so they're getting more and more used to this, the younger generation. But there's also the issue of trust. Do people actually trust the party at the other end? Do they trust the bank? Do they trust to upload their identity documents? Are they afraid they're going to be misused, etc.? So the trust factor is really important. Is somebody monitoring everything they're doing? So you need a good solution to empower the users, so you have faith in the solution. But this is a complex parameter. These are some of the challenges. And also, again, the users will ask themselves, well, why is this so complex? And you have to do all this just to see what the bank or the application is about. I mean, imagine a physical bank. You can walk into the bank. You can have a look around. You can, look at the buildings. You can look at the people working there, get an, impression. Nobody asks you for any credentials. But if you're going to do the same thing with a digital bank, well, there's no way you can do that. You won't get access to anything until you have signed up. And signing up is this, huge process of providing all this information. So how do we get a balance right? There's a cost associated. You want to keep the cost down. You have the regulatory compliance. Well, you can't compromise on that. You need to follow that. But maybe there are some ways you could say, well, we can let the user in, but you can only, add money to the account. You can have a cap, say, well, you can only do this much. If you're going to do more money, then we need to ask for more credentials. And the third item is the abandonment rates. Those 40% I mentioned, you really want 40% of the customers waiting outside your door to leave. So this is the balance, and this is the challenge. So we must simplify this somehow. We must somehow make it easier to do the onboarding. I mentioned KYC. So KYC is about establishing trust. And KYC is more than the actual onboarding process. It's a continuous process of monitoring behavior and determining risk and things like that. From my perspective, we're looking at the identity assurance, the initial assurance of collecting and analyzing the information, and looking up, checking the name, checking the information for against registries, for example, a PEP lookup, which is important. If the user signing up is a PEP, well, more checks are needed. So this is what we'll be looking at, not this continuous monitoring after the user is signed up. I like the term reasonable assurance. We want to have reasonable assurance that the user is who he or she claims to be. Assurance is never absolute. You can never determine 100%. There's always an element, that can be faked. And what is reasonable depends on several factors, of course. The laws, it's about the risk. I mean, if it's a low risk, well, you don't really need to know so much. If the consequences are low, it doesn't really matter. Of course, if it's a high risk, high consequence, you really need to know who this is. Will he pay back the money, or is this somebody that's laundering money? It's about the resources and also the available technology. So as a user, what do you do to prove your identity? Well, several factors. These are some of them. I mean, you can prove possession of phone. Rather easy, you send a text message to a phone, you can prove that. You can upload a self-portrait, or then you can ask, well, can you trust it? Can't I upload a portrait of anybody? Well, sure. But then you can do liveness tests and say, well, upload two photos, one where you're smiling and one where you're not, one with your eyes open, one with your eyes closed, and things like that. So you can do several things as part of this self-portrait to verify that it's live, or at least make it more probable. ID paper upload, uploading your passport, uploading your driver's license or other ID paper. In the regions where you have electronic identifiers, like the bank ID in Norway and Sweden and eIDAS in the Netherlands, etc., you can use that as part of the process. In some cases, that might be all you need. In other cases, you can do that as one step and then do some more steps. You can do a microtransaction, meaning you ask the user to pay a very small amount of money, like a cent or something, and based on that, he will prove that he has access to an account and who he is. The commercial identities could be used, Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, etc. Can you trust those? Well, you could do additional checks. You could check how old is the account, how many friends, does it have activity. You can get a pretty good probability score if this is a real account or a fake one. You could check on LinkedIn, you could check the recommendations. That could tell you something about this. And of course, getting a 10-year-old Facebook account would be pretty hard. I guess it would be a lot easier to go on the dark web and buy a fake passport. Then again, I know there are organizations that are actually farming these commercial identities with the purpose of selling them at some time in the future. eIDAS, I'm coming back to eIDAS. For those who do not know what it is, it's an EU regulations about identities and other trust services. So identities is the core of it, and it's a way of harmonizing the identities and, across the countries in Europe. I'll touch back on that a little bit later. And you can do a proof of address, typically done in one or two different ways. Either you upload a utility bill, which is quite normal in some countries, or you could send a letter to your physical mailbox and you pick it up. Challenge with that, of course, it's going to take several days before you get there. So it's not really a good way, but it gives a fairly strong proof of address. Then on the other side, you have the party verifying the identity. What you do? Well, I talked about some on the commercial identities. You can do verifications. How active is the user? What's the probability that this is a real user? With the eID, you will typically get some information about, in some cases you may get a social security number, or at least you get some other information. An important part of verification is the lookup services. So you can do registry lookup in multiple directories. I mentioned PEP already, so you would do a lookup in a PEP registry and see if you find a person there. Countries may have national registries with all people where you have information like the address, the phone number, things like that. You can look up in organizational registries. Okay, I've been talking a lot about people here, but we also talk about onboarding organizations, right? So as a user, I'm onboarding an organization. And then we could do a lookup to an organizational database to verify my affiliation with that organization. Excuse me. And then, of course, you could do the manual check. You could collect all this information. You could do some automatic checks and verify the score. But you could say, well, we need to check some more. You can send it to a manual check. Of course, ideally, you'd like to avoid that. This costs money and it takes more time. The user has to wait while this is being done. So you want to avoid that. You want to do as much automatic as possible. Then again, having a manual check as part of the process would make sense, especially in the startup, when you start using more advanced digital onboarding, to verify that this process is working as expected. And of course, you could take it even further and then request either a physical or virtual meeting. Some laws, regulations say you have to have a face-to-face meeting. And then of course the question is, how is face-to-face defined? Would a two-way video conference be accepted as a face-to-face meeting? Of course, that would be cheaper and simpler than having a physical meeting, where you most probably will lose the client, either because this is too time-consuming, or even if you're in a big geographic area, it's not really feasible to do it all. And also look at the user motivation for providing all this information. Back to my example earlier, the user just want to look around. User just want to, is this bank application functional? Does the bank have the features I want? Do they have the interest, etc.? Pretty much just get in and look around. And in that case, the user is not very motivated to, seriously, I have to upload a passport to do this. It needs to get in simple. Typically, I mean, in your social media, just click, I want to be a customer, and pull up the information from Facebook, Google, whatever, and you're inside. And of course, from the bank side, this is an advantage as well, because then you have got something about the user. You have started the relationship can get going. Hopefully that the user is going to like this. Wow, this looks pretty good, and at some time say, well, okay, I want to, buy a house, want a loan. And of course, in this case, the user understands that I do have to provide a lot more information, and the motivation is a lot higher as well. And there may be steps in between here. So let's look at an example on this now. So on this example, we have John on the left, and we have a bank on the right, and John wants to sign up. At the bottom, there's the graph. It's empty right now. This is the assurance level of John. And this is not absolute, obviously. This is an example of how we could think in this way. Then, at the bank, you could define thresholds, saying, well, to do limited functionality, to get in at all, you need to reach threshold number 1. And to have the full functionality, to do everything, well, we are obliged by the financial regulations to do a full KYC process and PEP checks and everything. So then you need to pass threshold 2. Again, just see this as an example of a way of thinking in the identity assurance. So, what's John do? He fills in a form providing basic information. And can we trust any of this information? No, obviously not. It's filling in a form. Anybody could write anything in this form. So the assurance bar is still empty. Then we can send a text message to John's phone, saying, John, please enter the number you just received on the text message. This is what we call a one-time password, and now we have verified that John, at least this point in time, is in possession of this phone. So we have a verified phone number. Gives us some assurance, not a lot, but a little bit. Good start. We asked John to take a self-portrait. This could add liveness tests, could be more or less advanced, and again, the assurance bar might go up a little bit, especially if we have the liveness tests. We could also do another interesting thing. We could do a self-portrait with an OTP. We send a text message to the phone. We say, hey John, write this number on a piece of paper, hold it up in front of you while you take the photo. Now we have a verified photo. Again, nothing is 100%, but at least we're increasing the probability that this is a genuine photo. There would be a timeout on this. You would only have a few minutes to do this. So at this time, maybe now we say, well, okay, we have a verified phone number, we have a verified photo, reasonable assurance, this is good enough. Hey, come on in, John. So now we can get the relationship going. We give him the app, he can log in, he can look at that, and so on, create these accounts. But we might want to go further. We say, well, we need your passport. We see you have a lot of money in the account. Sorry, we have to lock it down due to regulations, but if you upload your passport, you will get access to it. Or at least you need to provide more information. So John uploads a copy of his passport. Of course, now we could do a comparison with a photo in the passport with a verified photo we took earlier. That would increase the probability. The passport would verify his name and his date of birth. So we would get more information. You see the assurance bar is growing now. Then we could do a lookup in the registry or more. Some sort of data authority having data. We could verify is the passport genuine. We could look up John and his birth date in the national registry. This would even increase the insurance even more. And remember, at this stage, we're still 100% automatic. There's no manual processes in the bank. All this is done automatically. Of course, John would have to take his photo and upload his passport. But we could say, well, we're not really sure about John still. We need to do a manual check on this. We send it on this to a person in the bank who would look at the information and see, does it look okay? Maybe do some additional searches, verify, and that would be okay. Or this person could say, there's still something fishy here, and set up a video conference. Of course, this is more challenging than just doing a manual check. You need to agree on a time. You need to make sure the technology works on both ends. You rather not have John downloading a separate application for this once only purpose. So there are some challenges with this, but it would increase the assurance even more. So my point here, this being an example, that you have multiple methods combined by adding one on top of the other, and the more you add, the better your assurance is. And then also defining these thresholds, saying, well, this is how much we need to get John in and get the relationship going. So, completely different example. Still John. And we say, well, John, you can get a customer. We have a become customer button in Facebook. So the bank receives information from Facebook about the name. Facebook will typically have a phone number. You may even have two-step authentication enabled, which means you have a verified phone number. It may have a date of birth, which may or may not be verified, but at least Facebook may give you a lot of information there. Again, assurance level, pretty high on this graph. Again, take it as an example, nothing absolute. This really depends on the scenario. We could do the same OTP thing to get a verified phone number, unless Facebook already told us it was. This is simple, doesn't require anything, works on any good old stupid phone. And then we could do a general web verification. You could do an automatic check, look up in different registries, doing, what should I say, web scraping, do a Google search and collect the information and analyze it, and that could give assurance. Okay, we're still looking at examples on how this can be done. In itself, this will probably not be compliant to the financial regulations, but it's still an interesting thought to simplify the process. Okay, so I mentioned the eIDAS a couple of times. eIDAS is a regulation. It's about harmonizing electronic identities and other trust services like electronic signatures and seals, delivery, they're looking at archiving, and it's different kind of trust services. But from an identity perspective, eIDAS operates with assurance levels, low, substantial, and high. These are the levels. And these blue blobs are quotes from the eIDAS regulation. The levels gives the degree of confidence in electronic identification. Okay, and also eIDAS is technology neutral, so it doesn't specify any means of doing this. eIDAS is now in the process of being implemented in the laws of the various countries. And eIDAS also says that, and of course that's the purpose, that this is cross-border, that one country should then recognize an eIDAS identity from another country. And that's what gives the power of the eIDAS. So if you look at this from an assurance perspective, maybe, I'm just saying maybe, it could be as simple as this. We're not there yet, but sometime in the future, John would authenticate using his home country EID, which then would give an assurance low, substantial, and high, and this would work cross-border. This would really simplify the world for everybody if we could get a model like this. eIDAS is still in its infancy. What information will actually be provided by eIDAS and from which countries? Will eIDAS be sufficient? Maybe, maybe not. Banks are under the anti-money laundering. Will eIDAS provide sufficient information to satisfy their requirements? Will they also need like tax declarations and creditworthiness, which is on the side? Could that be handled by lookups? And what about the trust factor? Are we sure that every country will accept an eIDAS EID from another country? You have the challenge of the business systems identifier. Typically, this in Norway where I come from, this identifier is the social security number, which is limited to 11 digits. How will that handle identities from other countries? But I think we'll see that the eIDAS will become an important assurance component and hopefully simplify this whole thing of knowing who we are dealing with. So that was the end of my presentation. So then I'm open for questions. I don't know if you've gotten any questions coming in there, Dorte?
Well, thank you very much, John Erik, for the presentation. We have a few questions, yes, and I will give you the first one. Isn't eIDAS only for public services?
Well, true. eIDAS is initially then defined for public services. So as a foreigner, I can access the public services in a country. But we're seeing initiatives now to also move this into the private sector. And I think for the success of eIDAS, this is important. If it's only for public services, the use is limited. That may be a challenge. I think if we can also have other parts of society accept both the identifiers but also electronic signatures, that would be great help. And yes, there are initiatives on getting that, making that happen now.
Thank you very much. And you're ready for the next one? You mentioned gradual onboarding. What does the regulators say about this?
Well, remember the agenda of the regulators is focused on preventing money laundering and preventing terrorist financing. So they will be very strict on this. Also in some countries they are even tightening in making it stronger. So of course we need to have them in the loop. We need to discuss also with the regulators. And again, my model on this is, as I mentioned, could we make it simple just to get in the door, give you very limited access? I mean, some gambling sites do this. I mean, when you're gambling, you're also under the KYC requirements. They will let the user in, but if you win a lot of money, well, you need to identify and prove yourself to get the money. So, yes, traditionally, this KYC process is very binary. So in that sense, this is a new way of thinking, doing gradual, doing step-up of identities.
Okay, good. The next question is about next to the user experience in the onboarding process, there are other important business-related needs, one being compliance and the other fraud reduction. How do you see fraud reduction being a part of the onboarding process?
Well, this is again all about being sure who you're dealing with. You need to know who the person or the company at the other end is. Is it trustworthy? And I see the onboarding as, or the identity assurance as both verifying the identity, which this talk has been mostly about, who is this person, but also doing lookups in various registries to, I mentioned PEP already, which is a special case, but you could also check credit worthiness, you could do other kind of checks, you could do a general, I mean, if you could automate doing Google search for a user and then analyzing the results, that could give you something. So all in all, the more you know about the person, then that will reduce the fraud. You could even also use another concept I haven't mentioned, is to have somebody else vouch for the user. I mean, that would be similar to giving recommendations on LinkedIn, but you could ask existing customers, well, you know this John Viking that's signing up here, can you give him any, recommendation? So in that sense, yeah, this could be a help in fraud prevention.
Good. The next question, or the last question, I think, unless you have more questions, you're welcome to fill it in the chat box. eIDAS as an EU regulation will have direct effect in each of the EU member states going live September next year. What is the biggest challenge to be ready for this state?
Well, I think I touched on it. I mean, one is of course recognizing the identity. I mean, you have people from another country accessing your system, logging in. If your system, which at least the countries I know, is based on the social security number of the identifier, this number is sort of embedded in all the systems. How do you handle then a user from a different country? Will you still have to issue a new type of identifier? This is typically done, I can refer to Norway. I mean, we have the 11-digit social security number, but there's a special range for foreigners. So you had people from another country doing business in Norway and they need a bank account. You cannot get a bank account without a social security number. So then there's a range of numbers for people which are non-natives. That works fine, but that actually means that while you're using the original, you're using the eIDAS identifier just to issue a new one, and then you will get yet another identifier. And I mean, as a user, I don't want more identifier. Ideally, if I could use my eIDAS everywhere, I mean, that would be great, right? I would only have to have one identifier and use that everywhere. So, and to make that happen, of course, we will have to, in our business systems, to recognize foreign identifiers. And of course, that is the challenge. And of course, as mentioned, the challenge is, okay, how successful will this be? How many will embrace it? Will we make it go into the private sector as well as the public? Will the technology be set up? Will the laws be in place? So there are still some challenges, but I think we are on the right direction here on making this happen.
Thank you very much then. We haven't got any more questions. So I think we will end the presentation. Thank you very much, John Erik.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for everybody for listening to this presentation.